Have you ever wanted to connect with someone and felt your body say no before your mind had a chance to decide? A racing heart before a social event? A wave of dread at the thought of walking into a room full of people? A conversation that replays in your mind for hours afterward, every word examined, every pause second-guessed? A phone call you've been putting off for days because something about making it feels impossibly hard. Or maybe it's subtler than that. Maybe you show up, you engage, you appear perfectly comfortable to everyone around you, but on the inside, something is working very hard, monitoring, evaluating, bracing, waiting for something to go wrong. And afterward, even if nothing went wrong, you're exhausted in a way that is difficult to explain. If any of this sounds familiar, I want you to know something important. This is not a personality flaw. This is not shyness that you should simply push through, and it is not evidence that you are somehow unsuited for connection. It is your nervous system doing something very specific, something it learned to do for a reason, and something that can change. Welcome back. I'm Madeleine Lowry, a neural retraining specialist. We're continuing our series on loneliness and the nervous system. In episode 121, we explored the broad landscape of internal patterns that keep genuine connection out of reach. Hyper-independence, perfectionism, overgiving, the beliefs of being too much or not enough, and withdrawal. Today, we're going deeper into one of the most significant of these patterns, one that deserves its own dedicated conversation, because it is one of the most common nervous system barriers to connection, and one of the most misunderstood: social anxiety. Social anxiety is estimated to affect somewhere between 12 and 15% of people at some point in their lives, making it one of the most prevalent anxiety presentations there is. And yet, it is frequently minimized, dismissed as shyness, introversion, or simply being bad at socializing. It is none of those things. Social anxiety is a nervous system response, a specific pattern of threat detection that has been calibrated through experience to treat social situations as dangerous. And understanding it through that lens changes not just how we relate to it, but what we can actually do about it. Let me start by being clear about what social anxiety is and is not. Social anxiety is not the same as introversion. Introverts find social interaction draining and need solitude to recharge, but they don't necessarily experience social situations as threatening. They may enjoy connection deeply. They simply need more recovery time afterward. Social anxiety is not the same as shyness. Shyness is a temperamental tendency toward caution in new social situations. It is common, relatively mild, and often fades with familiarity. Social anxiety is something more specific and more debilitating. It is the experience of social situations, or the anticipation of them, as genuinely threatening. Not intellectually threatening. The person usually knows rationally that nothing terrible is likely to happen. But the nervous system doesn't operate on intellectual knowledge. It operates on learned patterns, and the pattern it has learned is social situations carry risk. Specifically, the risk of being judged, evaluated, embarrassed, rejected, or humiliated. And in response to that perceived risk, the nervous system activates the stress response with the same physiological urgency it would bring to a physical threat. Let's talk about what social anxiety actually feels like in the body, because this is important, not just for those experiencing it, but for anyone who loves someone who does. Before a social situation, the nervous system begins preparing. Anticipatory anxiety kicks in, sometimes hours or even days before the event. The mind runs through scenarios: what might go wrong, what might be said, how others might respond. This is the nervous system trying to prepare for and prevent a threat it perceives as real. During the social situation itself, the stress response is often fully activated. Heart rate increases, breathing becomes shallow, muscles tighten, the face may flush. There may be sweating, trembling, or a sensation of unreality. Attention narrows. A significant portion of cognitive resources are redirected toward threat monitoring rather than genuine engagement with the conversation or the people present. This is why social anxiety is so exhausting. The person is not simply having a conversation. They are managing a full stress response while simultaneously trying to appear normal and engage meaningfully with other people. And that is an enormous amount of work. And afterward, the nervous system doesn't simply settle. There's often a period of post-event processing, replaying what was said, evaluating how it landed, searching for evidence of having said something wrong or having made a bad impression. This processing loop can last for hours, sometimes days, and it keeps the stress response running long after the situation itself has ended. Let's talk about how social anxiety develops. Social anxiety doesn't arrive out of nowhere. Like all nervous system patterns, it develops in response to experience. Sometimes the origins are relatively clear: a period of bullying or social exclusion, a humiliating experience in front of peers, growing up in an environment where judgment, criticism, or shame were frequent, a family dynamic where making mistakes had significant social consequences. But sometimes the origins are subtler. A sensitive child who absorbed over time that their natural way of being, their intensity, their emotion, their particular way of engaging was too much or not quite right. A child who was frequently corrected in social situations, leaving them with a chronic uncertainty about whether they were doing things correctly. A child who watched a parent navigate social situations with anxiety and whose nervous system absorbed that template as its own. And sometimes social anxiety develops or intensifies in adulthood, following a significant social wound, a public failure or humiliation, a betrayal by a trusted group, as we discussed in our last episode, a period of severe stress or illness that disrupted the person's social confidence and ease. In all of these cases, the nervous system learned the same lesson. Social situations are where things go wrong, where I'm evaluated, where I might be found lacking, where something painful might happen, and it began preparing accordingly. And here's the painful paradox at the heart of social anxiety. The very thing the nervous system is protecting against, social pain, rejection, humiliation, is made more likely, not less, by the anxiety itself. Because when the nervous system is in a state of threat activation during social situations, it becomes harder to be genuinely present, harder to listen fully, harder to respond naturally, harder to let the other person in. The monitoring, the bracing, the self-consciousness, all of it creates a kind of glass wall between the person and genuine connection. They're there, but not fully there, engaged, but from behind the protection of hypervigilance. And the cost of that is profound loneliness. Not the loneliness of having no one. Often people with social anxiety have relationships. They show up. They participate. But the quality of presence they can offer and the depth of connection they can receive is limited by the constant work the nervous system is doing in the background. There is also the avoidance dimension. Because the anticipatory anxiety of social situations is often so uncomfortable, people with social anxiety may begin avoiding situations that trigger it, declining invitations, avoiding settings where they don't know people well, keeping relationships at a manageable but carefully limited depth. And as we discussed in episode 121, avoidance is self-reinforcing. Each avoided situation sends the nervous system the message Yes, this was dangerous. I was right to be afraid. And the world of manageable social situations grows smaller, and the loneliness deepens. I want to take a moment to address something that is particularly relevant for many of the people listening to this series. Social anxiety and chronic illness have a complicated and often bidirectional relationship. On one hand, chronic illness can trigger or worsen social anxiety. Illness changes how people feel in social situations, the unpredictability of symptoms, the fear of being visibly unwell, the uncertainty about energy and capacity can all make social situations feel more risky and less navigable. The experience of not being believed or understood, which we'll explore in depth in episode 126, can contribute to a withdrawal from social connection that begins to look and feel like social anxiety even if it wasn't present before. On the other hand, the nervous system dysregulation that underlies many chronic conditions is the same nervous system dysregulation that underlies social anxiety. They share a common root, which means that addressing social anxiety through neural retraining often benefits the broader chronic illness picture as well. And addressing the nervous system dysregulation underlying chronic illness often brings relief from social anxiety as a secondary effect. They are not separate problems with separate solutions. Oftentimes, they are expressions of the same dysregulated nervous system, and they respond to the same kind of work. Many people with social anxiety have spent years trying to think their way out of it. They understand intellectually that their fear is disproportionate. They know rationally that the conversation they're dreading is unlikely to be catastrophic. They have read about cognitive approaches. They have tried to challenge their thoughts. They have pushed themselves into social situations hoping that exposure would eventually reduce the fear. And sometimes these approaches help to a degree. Cognitive strategies can provide useful frameworks. Graduated exposure can reduce avoidance. But for many people, the anxiety persists despite years of intellectual understanding and determined effort. And the reason for that comes back to where the pattern is actually stored. Social anxiety is not primarily a thinking problem. It is a nervous system pattern. It is stored in the subconscious mind. That means it operates below the level of rational thought. You cannot think your way out of a subconscious pattern any more than you can think your way out of a flinch response. The pattern is too fast, too deeply ingrained, and too automatic for the conscious mind to reliably intercept it. This is why approaches that work at the level of the subconscious nervous system, rather than the thinking mind, can be so much more effective for social anxiety than insight-based approaches alone. In neural retraining, we work directly with the subconscious patterns that are generating the social anxiety response. We are not analyzing where the anxiety came from. We are not rehearsing social situations. We are not trying to convince the nervous system that social situations are safe. Instead, we allow the subconscious mind to identify and neutralize the emotional charges stored around the experiences that taught the nervous system to treat social situations as threatening. And as those charges dissolve, something fundamental shifts. The nervous system's threat assessment of social situations begins to change. Not because it has been argued into a new position, but because the subconscious programming that was generating the threat response is no longer as active. People often notice this shift gradually. A social situation that would have triggered significant anticipatory anxiety begins to feel more neutral. The post-event processing loop quiets. The glass wall between themselves and genuine connection begins to thin. They find themselves more present in conversations, genuinely listening, genuinely responding, without the background hum of monitoring and evaluation. And as that presence becomes more possible, something that has been missing becomes available. The actual experience of connection, not performed, not managed, but felt. And for many people who have lived with social anxiety for years or decades, that experience, of being genuinely present with another person without fear is quietly profound. Before I close, I want to say something specifically to those of you who identify as highly sensitive. As we explored in our earlier series on sensitivity and chronic illness, sensitive nervous systems process social information more deeply. They pick up on subtleties, tones of voice, microexpressions, emotional undercurrents that others may miss entirely. This deep processing is a genuine gift, but it also means that sensitive individuals may be more attuned to social nuance in a way that can tip into hypervigilance. More aware of how they are coming across, more affected by other people's reactions, more likely to detect and to dwell on moments of perceived misattunement. For sensitive people, social anxiety often has a particular quality. Not just fear of obvious rejection or humiliation, but a more subtle, pervasive uncertainty. A chronic wondering whether they are landing quite right, quite fitting in, quite being received the way they hope. If that resonates, if your social anxiety has that quality of deep, careful attention to every nuance of how you are being received, I want you to know that the same sensitivity that makes social situations feel so loaded is also what makes you so responsive to neural retraining. The nervous system that processes deeply is also the nervous system that can shift deeply, and what has felt like a burden, the acute social awareness, the intense self-monitoring, can begin to transform into something closer to its original gift: genuine attunement, empathy, and presence. If social anxiety has been a barrier between you and the connection you genuinely want, if you have spent years showing up while something on the inside worked very hard to stay safe, I want to offer you something. Not another strategy to manage the anxiety, not a framework for challenging your thoughts, but a different understanding of what is actually happening and what is actually possible. Your nervous system learned to treat social situations as threatening. It did that for reasons that made sense at the time. It was trying to protect you. But that pattern is not permanent. The nervous system is not fixed, and the subconscious programming that has been generating the anxiety can change, not by force or discipline or determined exposure, but through working directly with the nervous system itself. When that happens, social situations begin to feel different. Not necessarily easy right away, but less loaded, less dangerous, more like an opportunity for something genuine rather than a threat to be survived. And connection, real, present, nourishing connection, begins to feel like something the nervous system can actually receive. In our next episode, we're going to explore another dimension of the loneliness picture, the specific ways that chronic illness and loneliness feed each other, creating a cycle that makes both harder to heal and that so rarely gets addressed in conventional treatment. If you would like to learn more about this work in the meantime, please visit tcneuralretraining.com. Schedule a free consultation by phone or take our free quiz. If this episode resonated with you, please follow the podcast, give it a positive rating, and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Thank you for listening. Content of this podcast copyright 2026 by Twin Cities Neural Retraining. Music by Barbara Ben.